Hello, everybody, and welcome to my newest episode of HR Visionaries. Today, we will be talking about workplace conflicts. And there is no better person to talk about this topic than Daniel Loewa. Why I'm saying this? Because I've known Daniel for a very, very long time. And almost every time we meet, we talk about this subject. Is that right, Daniel? Thank you very much for accepting my invitation. I'm very, very happy for having you here. And before we dive into this complex topics, I would like to ask you to tell us a few words about you. Who is Daniel Loewa?
Will do. Thank you, Andrea. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. And thanks for the nice introduction. You raised the bar.
Yeah.
And we actually continue our conversation that we have in other contexts, as you said here. Yeah? So we'll somehow blend it into everything we've talked about before. So what I bring to the table is a long corporate career in different positions, mostly in HR. I have leadership experience for 17 plus years now. As head of HR, I went with other managers through the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that's something we will probably come across today. And since about 3 years and a bit more, I'm actually a line manager. So that's the other role that we somehow come across. And now I have the opportunity to develop team leads in handling conflictuous situation much better. So I think I bring a good mix of practical experience plus some qualification to the table today. On the way, I obtained some qualifications in negotiation and in mediation, and somehow everything has to do with conflict.
That's why I said you're the best person to be here. So thank you very much once again for being here and for the short introduction. So as a first question, and this is, I think, a curiosity that not only I have, but also the persons who are watching us, is what's your personal take on workplace conflicts?
Well, I'll tell you briefly where I came from and where I now am in seeing conflict. First of all, in the past, I didn't like conflict. And I think many people would initially agree to say, oh, conflict is something bad. Conflict is something we would like to avoid. Over time, I came to realize that it's inevitable to run into conflict. Organizations are built around conflict. There is no such thing as a conflict-free week due to lack of resources, lack of time, many conflicting interests, conflicting targets. Plus, we are dealing with human beings. When it comes to then having teams and different teams and value chains, we look at a social system with its own dynamics. So conflict is everywhere. And the other take is that I would actually be very suspicious if somebody would say we do not have conflict in our team. That usually is like a red alert, because that may be true for a short time, but most likely it indicates that there's some kind of hiding, maybe even toxic positivity, like, oh, we love each other, nothing ever comes up here. And that would not be good as one extreme. And of course, the other extreme, where it's only conflict, is also not good. So what we would try to find is some kind of middle ground where we normalize conflict, where we give conflict a space, where we also talk about conflict in a manner that we know how to handle conflict. And that would be one of the important approaches to, first of all, normalize conflict in dealing with it. It's not always the loud, the big bang conflict. There are lots of conflicts if we look at some of the signs that are much smaller and much easier at first to handle.
Okay, and we're talking, you're talking about conflicts, generally speaking, but what would you like to approach? What kind of conflict would you like to approach during our podcast?
Yeah, I mean, we will be able to look at different stages. You know?
Okay.
So maybe to start small, we don't have to talk about that much, but to start small, sometimes conflicts come very, very low profile, very much under the threshold of awareness. And even those conflicts have a meaning to us, because every big problem and every big conflict started as a small one. And to see that early, to somehow realize that maybe just a breakdown in communication, an awkward silence in meetings or in conversations with team members, all of those can be very early signs. And I think it's already worth to address those apparently small conflicts before we go into the heated conflicts where we have to speak about how to somehow shield us against the influence of high emotion, whatever comes up. So I would recommend to look at conflict in different stages. There are conflicts that are somewhere around the awareness threshold and where it's then worth already to think about an intervention. The earlier I intervene, the less complex the situation usually is. The later I intervene, the more dynamic I have in the conflict, and somehow conflict is like a living being. It starts to feed itself. It starts to feed itself of the energy that is coming into it. And at some point, it may escalate in a way that we lose control over the dynamic, and then we probably have the kind of conflict that we all really, really need and want to avoid, because it really creates a lot of damage on the personal level, but maybe even on the company level, on the financial level. Maybe even.
Yeah, that's so true, Daniel. Thank you for that. And you were talking about we. Who is we? I guess you mean by we, you mean the line manager and HR manager. So what would be the role of a line manager, and what would be the role of an HR manager when we're talking about conflicts in the workplace? Who is bearing the responsibility here?
That is probably the most simplistic picture we can draw, and that's okay for the conversation to use it as a model. Every model reduces complexity. Every model tries to somehow avoid all the different influences. So if we look at it as a triangle, we have the employee, a manager, and HR. That is usually something that HR and managers draw when they speak about who does what, and ideally they do speak about who does what. Then first message would be HR and manager are a team. And that's also important, that this is, in a certain degree, team play, that this is not a solo sport if we look at conflict resolution. And actually now, responsible are many people, but there is one role mainly accountable, and that's the manager. So the manager is the interface to the employee. The manager is responsible for the results of the team and of the individual, and for customer happiness, and for everything that comes with what the team is contributing to the value chain. The manager is responsible for productivity, for all the things that may be influenced now negatively by a conflict. So that's the manager. What HR does is set a framework, and in a way have the process framework from the internal regulation via everything that needs it from as a formal base, a performance management process, tools, milestones. But these are just frameworks. They only come to life by the manager in the interaction with the employee, in this case, if we keep it to the simple triangle. And again, these are roles that ideally do not work against each other. I would not even say that to team up against an employee. Ideally, manager and HR team up against the problem that we talk about, and kind of step back from teaming up against a person here.
That's a very, very important idea, because why I ask this question is I know from the cases that we manage in practice for our clients is that most of the times the manager they feel they are not responsible, so they shift it all the responsibility to HR.
It's a people topic, right? Let HR deal with it.
Yeah, it's a people topic, so you have to deal with it. But it's very important for them. They know that they play a big role, and from the very beginning, because if they swipe the problem under the carpet, which usually happens in practice, and they don't talk and involve HR in due time, it might be too late, and the conflict would escalate. So let's say that we do have a conflict in the workplace. How do HR managers and line managers need to prepare mentally? They know I have to have a difficult conversations. What are the inner questions that I have to ask myself in order to prepare mentally? Because people in organization usually don't talk about this step, which from my point of view is one of the most important steps. So before diving in and conducting the conversation with the employee, one should prepare mentally.
Yeah.
So what are your recommendations?
It is the absolute most important step in the entire process. If the involved people fail to prepare, then we are preparing to fail. That is basically setting up the stage for failure if we don't prepare. You also mentioned something. Ideally, the manager decides early in a process to intervene. That doesn't mean hasty, that doesn't mean fast, just early and considerate. And to be fair, if we need a partner and want a partner like HR in the process, to also involve that partner early, that's what you just mentioned. So I measured my success as a head of HR kind of in how early was I involved when problems came up. And the earlier we talk about that, the more room for solutions still exists. At some point, it gets very narrow, and then we don't really have space for solutions anymore. So in the preparation, now speaking what I would do. First, I would want to understand the problem. And I want to fix a problem, not a person. That's also what I said earlier. That's part of the mindset and preparation. I'm not going against a person. I'm going against a problem, against a behavior, against maybe a misconduct. That's the behavior that I want to address, not the person. That helps a little bit to differentiate that. And to understand the problem, I have to also know the problem and probably investigate a bit more. So it's also worth investigating it a bit more. That can mean that I take further comments into account, that I observe a bit longer. Intervening early does not mean fast. So it can mean that I still observe a bit, that I think a bit. So if I learn somebody runs into my door and says there's a problem and there's a conflict and please come help, and I stand up and I rush in, then I reduce this preparation time to 2 seconds, more or less. And then I'm probably running into a more difficult conversation than I would need to have.
This is so common. We have so many cases.
And I've done this before too. So
managers react.
Yeah, I was in reactive mode many times. So the biggest failures that I would have to explain came from exactly the lack of preparation, taking different perspectives into account, collecting more input and thinking, yeah, I've got this. And then I go in, I've done this before, I can do this again. What can possibly go wrong? And reality will tell us what can possibly go wrong. The other thing is, now that's maybe a bit counterintuitive. Before I start, I think at the end. What do I want to achieve? What should be the outcome? Not necessarily only of one meeting, but of the entire process. Anyhow, we will speak about that a bit, that probably not one meeting will be enough to address a conflict and to resolve a situation. So what do I want to achieve? Do I want to just correct a certain performance and a certain behavior? How does good look like? What do I want to achieve? What's my expectation? Those are things that I have to define prior to the conversation, because then I can see how I work in that direction, and I don't need a straight line to get into this direction. I can go the right way, the left way, I can zigzag. And the main thing is that I get into this direction and work towards this wanted outcome. And that's something that it has to be clear. So if I enter the conversation and let's see where we get, then that's probably the direction that this conversation also takes. Then I have to know my role. What am I doing here? And there can be a role where I am even part of the conflict. That is much more complicated to then address. It can be that I want to moderate a conversation between others. I said earlier, I'm leading managers, where I also have to really think about what's my role. My role can be very much in preparing a process, but maybe I don't show up personally. My role can be that I open a meeting and somebody else does the talking or something else. We can look into this conversation topic in a moment. But that's also important too. What is my role? And I also have to think about what is my individual, my personal stake in this. Am I personally involved? And the more I'm involved, the less I can probably be the responsible person to lead this process, because I'm more or less in the system, and that's not ideal. And that's probably also then the good base to have emotions take over. That's anyhow the biggest risk. What happens then later on, that I somehow go in there and I have my ego that drives the conversation. So also a small ego check can help. Like, what do I act for my own interest? Do I want to achieve something that just looks good for me? Or do I do something that's important for the team, for the situation, for the client, for the company? Then I give myself a mandate, and that helps much more to treat myself as somebody with a mandate and say, I have a certain responsibility for a good outcome. But it's not about, do I win? Do I lose? Do I look good? Do I not look good in this? That's the ego-driven approach.
Yeah. And can a manager or an HR manager, can they manage these questions, this preparation on their own? Or would they need help? By help, I mean training or other tools. Because I get the feeling that in practice, we say, okay, the line manager is responsible, HR is responsible, but they are still people, they have emotions. And it's very easy to say, you have to do this, but I give you no tools.
tool is maybe also to narrowing it down. What we will discuss here is not a checklist where you have to do 10 points and then you resolve every conflictual situation. Maybe a few things. There are a few things that you don't need to train that are mostly mindset. And then there are things that it's worth training, where I would say the role of HR, to come to a step back to what you said earlier, the role can be also to enable managers in being better in situations like that, which is also better for their work-life balance if HR doesn't have to go into every conflict and try to somehow resolve everything there. So enablement, yes, and everything we discuss is a communication skill. So in a way to how to lead a conversation, how to give feedback, how to address uncomfortable things can, of course, be learned. And coming back to the tool, what I sometimes say, and it's one of the running gags that I have in my environment, if I only have a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. And of course, if I just go into the room and try to hit those nails, then this may be the right tool every now and then. Very often it is not. But the things that you don't have to learn, and that's something that's maybe helpful there as well, is to go in there with a certain mindset and certain things that I tell myself, affirmations or setups don't have to be learned and trained. They have to be self-trained. I have to basically train myself in how do I prepare, how do I go in there. And one of the key drivers, for instance, is curiosity. If I am curious about what's going on here, what kind of movie am I in, and who's playing what role, and what's the drama that we're looking at, and who is the bad guy, who is the good guy, and all these things, the drama usually fits to what we discuss here when we come to conflicts. And if I have this curiosity just to find out what's really, really going on, and what is behind what I see, there's always more below the waterline. The typical iceberg model applies here as well. I need to find this out. That's the investigation. The more I find out about what's going on, the more possibilities I have to create solutions later on. If I think it's a nail, then I hit on it. If I miss, then I missed. So this curiosity is something nobody can train me curiosity. That's something I need to bring myself.
Yeah, that's true. And you very well said that and pointed out that we need to think ahead about the outcome we want. So does this also influence the way or the handling situation? So handling mode, how I handle the conflict? Do we have several handling modes of conflict in the workplace? And if so, how can I know what the perfect version would be for my given conflict?
If perfect is the expectation, then it gets difficult anyway. So there are a few criteria that should and do influence the way I approach conflict and others approach conflict. And that's worth also to learn to observe in others. How do other participants of the discussion enter, or what dynamic do I have there? And two drivers. One is how important is the result? And that's usually the one thing that we naturally think of as a manager, as HR, as a company. We want a certain result. We want a certain behavior. We want a certain very clear outcome there. Ideally, I know the clear outcome, right? But there is this other element, and this is maybe ignored. How important is the relationship to my employee, to the team member? And that is very important if I want to continue to work with the person, right? And I want to maintain, maybe increase trust over time. And that's what a conflict can actually do. It's an opportunity to actually build trust if we manage this well, because we learn about each other. It's a bit counterintuitive that we can build trust by going through conflict. The better I handle it, the more likely it is that we learn to trust each other, that even difficult situations can be handled. So this relationship is the second very big determination factor of how I go into conflict. If both is important, if I want both, of course we want it all. That's maybe perfect as a setup or as a strategy. Then I need to find grounds to collaborate. Then I need to find common ground. That's what is maybe the win-win that is used in negotiation contexts. But that only works if I don't only look at rational topics and outcome on paper. I also have to look at in what relationship will I be after this process, after this conversation. If the relationship is not important anymore, for whatever reason, because maybe trust came to a point where it's just broken, where it's gone, this can happen. That would mean that we are in a very late, rather escalated stage of a conflict. This can, of course, happen suddenly, but usually there are things that happen before. then I can allow myself to rather compete for a good solution. So compete is another conflict strategy to go into such a discussion. This is, then I want only the good result and I don't have to worry about the relationship. This is, by the way, something you see when you would buy a used car. Yeah? You usually don't build a relationship between the seller and the buyer. That's where everybody just goes in competing, wants the best deal, and off we go.
Transactional.
Yeah, it can be, right. It becomes very transactional. And that's okay if I decided that the relationship is not at stake or it doesn't matter anymore. So and those are the two strategies that are the ones that at least help us pursue a result with more or less focus on the relationship. And since we have this as a matrix, let me just complete this a bit, because it's it comes to 5 conflict handling modes, which you find in literature as well. Lots of negotiation concepts build up on these 5 strategies as well. If I focus only on the relationship and not so much on the outcome, then I'm accommodating. That's what I'm doing at home. That's what I'm doing with family. Yeah, because the relationship is enormously important. And I might step back in my wanted outcome and say, yeah, whatever you decide, and it's okay. I maintain a good relationship, but I accommodate. And if I go into neither, which is the lose-lose strategy, so no result, no outcome, no investment in relationship, then we are all avoiding it. This can work short time, but that's not a long-term strategy. Short term, this can be okay, but it's not a long-term strategy. And then the middle ground is usually the compromise. And then I ask you back, Andrea, how do you see compromise between lose-lose and win-win? Where would you allocate the compromise?
I think there is compromise in any mode. Conflict resolution mode you go for, because with win-win you have to give up some of your requests in order to get the outcome you want, and with lose-lose, again, it's just like losing hope, and whatever happens. So I think compromise, but it's a different kind of compromise in each of the 2 situations. But this is very, and this is an idea I always try to explain to our clients, is that in any way there must be compromise. Why? To a certain degree. Because employers, in most of the conflicts, the ego is hurt, the trust is broken, so they want to have it all.
Yeah.
So with no compromise whatsoever, it's not very easy to talk to clients and determine and make them have the win-win situation, and just compromise on certain aspects.
Yeah.
So I think this is our difficult job, to just get a win-win, because in 99% of the times they want it all, and it's the situation you talked about, when you just react. You don't take the time to ask yourself the questions, to prepare mentally, to do the research, to understand the other person, his or her behavior, and you just react. And this for us becomes, as lawyers, becomes firefighting.
Yeah. Compromise is tricky in many ways. So I agree. Even on the win-win side, there may be concessions that either party had to give. And the compromise is in the middle of these dimensions. So it means it can be a bit of everything. And the compromise is maybe a bridge to more win-win. It can be somehow a segue on the way to get somewhere. And compromise, for instance, is daily business and politics. Without compromise, you usually don't bring different perspectives of political views together. So this may also apply to a workplace conflict. But I would see it as something rather on the way towards a clearer result. Maybe more focused on then result and outcome, or on relationship, whatever we have in mind, whatever is our focus. And the compromise can be good if both parties walk away and think they got the better part of the deal. And then it's usually a good compromise. A bad compromise is if either party says, yeah, that was not really what I wanted, and that's not really enough. So there's a risk in the compromise. And usually whatever we do, it may mean that I need to continue the discussion, need to continue this process to somehow bring clarity, resolve the conflict over time. Compromise is fair on the way. Maybe also all of these modes are okay. All of these modes are useful. They can be necessary depending on, for instance, how much time I have, how much energy I have. If I do not have the energy today to address a conflict, then avoiding can be okay today. Tomorrow I should rethink. That's what I said about avoiding. That's the short-term approach. The long-term is the collaboration. All the others are somewhere in between. And they can all be okay. They all have their time. They all have their environment in which they are okay. And if I understand that today it's okay to do it the one way, today I accommodate, but tomorrow I want to work towards a more collaborative approach, then I also learn how to be not so fixated on just one approach, on just one meeting. And it opens up a lot of possibilities if I create an ongoing process. If I try to solve the entire conflict in one meeting, then I am limited in whatever I do. And usually I come into this yes or no and win or lose approach. And in the worst case scenario, I lose, right? That's something that I would want to avoid.
Yeah, that's so true. So this is the number one thing I hope our viewers would understand, that you need to take the time before approaching a conflict. So Daniel, can you walk us through an example? As you said, you have a lot of examples. You managed a lot of conflicts in the workplace. Can you walk us through a conflict that you managed and what strategies, principles you had? What's your secret to remaining calm? Because this is also a very big issue, and how you try to avoid escalation.
Yeah, so then I will have to think a bit back, because in my role now, I actually prepare team leads to go into conflicts, and very rarely I'm in the front line of it. Of course, I can be if I have an issue with a direct report, but that's not the case, and that's probably not the best example here. All this preparation helps me already to also keep emotions somehow under control. The less I am prepared, the more I expose myself to spontaneous triggers. And one of the tricks there is that I expect to be triggered, that I expect to get angry. And just knowing that beforehand already helps me to see those signs and take a deep breath, and also with a certain maybe self-affirmation, like, oh, not today. Today I'm not going to jump on that train. I'm not going to allow this trigger, which consciously or subconsciously allows the other person to somehow distract me. Somehow somebody is able to put the focus somewhere else. Just imagine an insult, and all of a sudden we speak about this insult. That's usually not the issue. So that it's worth to also understand that this can be an unconscious deflection strategy by somebody, and all this gives me a bit of the tactical approach. So I can handle emotions, my own emotions, in a tactical way. What I cannot do is ignore them. They are there. My heartbeat goes up. My anger comes up, and then I say, "Oh, anger. Interesting. Why is that? What's happening here?" And knowing that's part of the trick there with the preparation, helps me in avoiding that. So what I do is I very rarely, when the conflict is at this stage where we speak about, let's say, heated situation, emotions are up, when things are close to escalating or are even escalated, then I do make it a team sport. One of the principles is I basically then have a protocol. I say, I don't do this alone. And even if I have just somebody, a silent witness, listening, taking notes, who has a certain role. If it's now HR, then it's HR. It can be a colleague. It can be somebody else who somehow has an appropriate mandate in this. Not doing this alone makes me behave better. I have another witness.
Peace of mind.
That's good. It gives us the chance to have another witness, not come into the he said, she said situation, which is then maybe in the aftermath, another conflict. This is also something to avoid. And it's also, if the team plays well, and that's ideally the setup, then we can support each other. If one of the others gets a tiny bit with the back to the wall, then somebody else can take over for 2-3 minutes in the conversation, very calmly, very quietly. Maybe a counterintuitive self message that I give myself when I enter such a conversation. I tell myself, I will be the nicest person in the room. Because I used to do this differently. I used to think that assertiveness means to be very loud and very pushy, not very loud, but very much above the usual level, to have a tough tonality or something like that. And I realized over time that the opposite works much more effective. Assertiveness can be quiet. Assertiveness can actually be kind, very respectful. Respect is the easiest concession that I can bring into this conversation. So all of these things are preparation. The rest is also logistics and setup. So do I want this to be seen by everybody, or do I want this conversation to be in a room that not everybody sees? Do I want to have the confrontation, or do I want to collaborate? Collaborate also meaning in the regards of the relationship. Then I may have a different sitting order. So all this in mind, I set this up, and it sounds like it's overthinking and over preparing, but whatever I prepare and do there saves me a lot of time.
Nothing takes you
in the further process. It does save me much more time. It sounds crazy, the preparation thing, but it usually saves time, although it's not so obvious.
And you also, if I may, you also have a saying that I like very much, is like just talk to the employee like you would talk to your grandmother.
Yeah, if it's in such a stage, then everything I say should be okay in front of a lawyer and in front of my grandmother. Very respectful, very objective. Yeah, I speak about behavior. I don't say things like, I don't like you, you are difficult, or anything like that. And by the way, this is also not helpful if I trigger the other person. So I don't only deal with my emotions. I also really want to avoid that I send the other person into a fight, flight, or freeze mode. All of us act under pressure in this regard. Yeah, if my survival instinct kicks in, and if I kick in the survival instinct of my employee, then what do I get? I do get a very heated up conversation, which does not really help me in this moment. Yeah. So I also don't do this spontaneously. This comes with a head up. This can be just a day before or 2 days before. I will actually say we will have a meeting and we'll discuss about how things are going right now. It's disclosed who will be in the meeting. So these things don't need to be secret. Of course, this person may have a bit of a sleepless night before him, but at least it doesn't come as a surprise. The surprise moment will probably kill my message in a way, because the person doesn't listen anymore. The person is just in survival mode. So I need to also do this preparation and somehow assuming how the person might react. I do not want this person cornered. That doesn't help me. If I corner the person, what's between that person and the door is me. And that person might go through me to get to the door. So what do I achieve? Then I may be the strong man in the room, but that's again the ego kicking in. I want to focus on the result, and just having this in mind helps me. So if it then kicks in, if something happens, I need to somehow have my response strategy. That can be a short breath. Like I said earlier, the short sentence, not today, not with me. If somebody triggers me, I can completely blend out harsh words and whatever else the other person uses in a self-defense strategy. This may come up. And all this helps to keep this meeting and this conversation constructive. And what's then important is to bring everything across very clearly. What is the expectation? If in doubt, repeat it. If in doubt, let even the other person repeat it. What did we just talk about here today? And have a very clear next step. And if I do not make big steps and only manage baby steps, that's also okay. If we meet tomorrow to continue, which is kind of like a timeout, if things are not possible today, then we meet again tomorrow. We meet again next week. We meet in a month. We meet in a quarter. All this came from the strategy that I want to maintain the relationship. If I don't want that, I don't want that, then I go the other way. Yeah, what I do in these cases, and let's just go all in there for the moment. If everything came to a point where we cannot continue to work with each other, and this should not come lightly as a decision. This should also come more from a 4 to 6 eye principle approach. We as a company do not want to work with this. If I don't want to work with this employee anymore, then this may be solved by giving that person another role, in another department. If the company is large enough, that can be part of the collaborative result. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
But if we as a company come to the point where we say, this is not okay anymore, this person damages our reputation, this person is not productive in the team, destroys somehow collaboration in the team, then we may come to this decision. That's also something that is prepared. That doesn't come spontaneous. That comes with maybe some agreements on what are the conditions under which we then aim for a terminated contract. Do we sense that there may be legal support needed or not? Yeah, then we do this ideally beforehand, then instead of afterwards. You wanted to jump in?
Yeah, this would have been my next question. So if we know that we are aware of the fact that we want to terminate the employment relationship, shouldn't the lawyer be in the room be it an external corporate lawyer that is on the employer side, or be it the lawyer of the employee. So we're not talking about the official disciplinary procedure where, yes, the employee can be assisted by their lawyer. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the discussion where we're talking about exit and how we do the exit, how we're signing the MTA.
So you asked for an example.
Yeah.
Let me get a bit more concrete. And it's far enough in the past that there's not a risk that somebody will say, oh, we're talking about me. So I was for a while responsible for a larger change process, even on a very big level. And if people have difficulty with change, that's one thing. That is the conflict that we handle where we want to maintain the relationship. If people start to work against this change and start to sabotage it, start to somehow create a bad morale in the team, then it called for a bigger intervention. And back then we actually still observed it for a while. We still looked at this like, let's put this person in our mind on probation. Maybe he or she managed this turnaround and says, let's go with the flow, at least accept the change. I don't want people to fall in love with it, but at least accept it. But there were actually two persons who kept on working against it in a very, very destructive way. So there were three people saying, this is the end. It does not go any further. First, to us. I took the mandate. I built the team. I actually designed who does what talking, and I even already looked at the process of a couple of steps. The first meeting was a colleague of mine with me, both in a management role in that department, coming with that person from the clarity, from the past behavior to the present, basically looking only into the past, basically what you did there, what happened here is not okay. And we looked at that, we told you there, we gave you the feedback, and up to today you haven't managed. From a psychological point of view, I separate these meetings actually. I only speak from the past to the present in the first meeting. I want this person to come into the present, because if that person continues to say, but back then I did this and we had this misunderstanding there, then I waste a lot of time. So I need to get this person to the present, and I need to be extremely clear that this behavior is not tolerated. And then the second meeting, usually a couple of days after this is announced, and say, we will meet again. We will meet in a week or so, and then we will only talk about the future. We talk only about the future. And the scenario can be a different role. As I said earlier, maybe there's a different role that somebody can. There can maybe be a downgrade. If somebody is in a management role and that doesn't work out, maybe I make another proposal, or I propose how we try it without each other. And that is then a separate meeting. In that meeting, we had that meeting with HR. HR was informed about the entire process. We discussed at what escalation level comes who into the discussion. And to answer that question, I would not see a lawyer early in the stage. I would create a process where if I need to have then certain escalations, that's where a lawyer could show up.
He should be on standby.
But then I would say on both sides. Because then we need to escalate on both sides with all participants, and then this could be the next step if necessary. Or we delegate this. This is also a process that we let only the lawyers discuss what are the conditions under which we see it feasible to go separate ways.
Yeah, once they agree on the MTA. Of mutual
or at least termination. No, I think that's still part of the negotiation. That can still be in the process of agreeing on the conditions in the mutual termination agreement. That can still be, yes.
Yeah, I do agree with your course of action, but I have one question. Why do you say that we need this 2-day break? Why do we have to have an initial conversation and then have the final conversation about the mutual termination? Why I'm asking, because most of the time after this initial discussion, the risk of them, sending confidential information to third parties by the concerned employee is very high, that he will go into medical leave. We all know it's very easy to take medical leave in Romania, so we will not see him for the next, 90 days. Yeah. So the plan is, in most 99% of the times, is to have one meeting and settle during that meeting. It's not a must, so it's not always a deal breaker, but it also depends what the risk is. Then the number one risk is this, that he will contact clients, that he will talk bad about the company in front of the colleagues, and so on and so forth. So it can be that those 2 days give him time to reflect, to talk to others, to transfer confidential information. So what's your take on this?
I've done that, and I do have rather bad experience with this one meeting, one day approach. Yeah, because it's naive to think that this person doesn't have data at home, contact data. And we did this in the past, and it didn't work as well as the other processes that I described. So in this process that I came up with, we had 8 days from the first meeting to the signature under the contract, and everybody said, wow, this was fast. And it went extremely quiet. There was no hassle. So of course, now that's the thing. Not every process is the same. Not every background is the same. The question is, how much leverage do we have? And the leverage can be very different. If the employee is in a stronger position based on whatever criteria, then this may be indicated there. And that depends, again, on the preparation, many things. So I would not have one size fits all here. It can be that at least the discussion between past, present, future happens in one meeting. This is okay. But then we have to basically separate it. What are we talking about now? Now we talk about how things can continue from here into the future. But I would still not have the need to have the contract on the table and say this contract leaves this room only signed or whatever. That is threatening, more or less. And I don't issue threats in such a conversation. That's also one of the learnings. I can talk about consequences.
It depends on the wording that you're using.
No, we need to talk about consequences. But if I threaten, let's say, then I have to put it through, whatever comes. And that's a very high stake. And if then happens what you just said, I might create a very messy, very long, very expensive process. And litigation is a very fair conflict resolution approach, but it's just with a lot of resources, with a lot of effort. In my career, I've seen a few processes go into litigation, and I would rather like to invest the time in the conversation there and get things smoother in these couple of days than have done a couple of months conversation with lawyers.
That's true. I agree, although I'm
and they can still happen. So nothing here that I say is in a way so clear that I can say if this then that. This is not a functioning system. We're speaking about human beings. I don't know every private situation. I don't know what hopes, fears this person has. I definitely trigger something when I come into such a conversation. If the conflict is so harsh that we say this doesn't work out here together, what's now your proposal to continue? That's, by the way, also something that I do. I sometimes even ask, how do you think things continue here? And let the fantasy also build up on my counterpart side as well. But of course, I cannot predict any further escalation, but I do want to avoid it. So my philosophy is there also, whatever I do, I don't want to make it worse. And I say this because I did that in the past. I've done things that made things worse in the moment, and that doesn't suit us well.
I want to add the fact that, putting pressure on an employee is a no-go. Because even from a legal point of view, because most of them would say that they're being harassed. So that's why I said it's very important what wording we're using. Yeah. You can say,
That's where the witness comes into.
The witness comes. So what we also do in many cases is we have one meeting, but then the employee has two options. Is either signing the MTA or we will move on with whatever plan B we have.
Yeah.
So I think this is also a strategy.
But I need to have a plan B. So if I do have a plan B, then I can point at that consequence, call it threat or not. I wouldn't. There is a consequence, but I need to have a plan B. If I don't have a plan B, then...
That's why what we always say, you always have to have a plan B. And if he doesn't want to sign, it's okay. So not putting pressure is perfect. You don't want to do that. You don't want ending up having a claim for harassment during that conversation, especially that we have to be aware of the fact that they will record every single conversation you have on sensitive.
But that's the lawyer and the grandmother. They replace the recording device.
Exactly. So it should remain an option. And if they don't want to sign, we can move further on on plan B, be it, I don't know, official disciplinary procedure.
Yes.
But there is no one size fits all.
Yeah, and we went now into a direction, and it's good that we come across this, which ideally is the exception of the exception.
Yeah.
So I would always recommend to not let it come that far, to see rather the early signs in conflict, to address expectations earlier, which is more work apparently in the process, but the explosion that I see at the end of such a process also doesn't make it better. So ideally, what we just came across was the super exception.
This is super exception. It's the time where the moment they call their lawyers.
Yeah.
I mean us, and we're doing all the fire department. So ideally, yes, you do have to approach a conflict from the very early stage. But the thing is, now I'm asking you rather psychological questions. Why do you think that managers, be it line managers or HR managers, why do they avoid the difficult conversations? Why do they avoid to address a conflict from the very early stage? Is it embedded in our, now you are German, but what I heard from a psychologist is it's also embedded in our culture. So Romanians are not very good, neither in giving feedback nor in receiving. So you rather play dead, swipe it under the carpet, hope it will go away, and then just react when it's most of the times too late.
Yeah. I would not bring this into the intercultural context too much, because even two Germans in one room might have very different
opinions,
strategies there. And I also have this in me, like, oh, not today a conflict, not really. Oh gosh, why me and why now, and so on. And then it comes to the question, and this is something that maybe managers don't consider. The question is also, how are they embedded in the management team? What is then discussed, like, what is our target here? What a manager does, he or she endangers a team result if I don't do this. And if I realize that it might be the right motivation to go in, this thing with a mandate works better than saying, I am now going into this conflict. I do this in the role of a manager, in the role of creating a team spirit. I do this also often enough for the other team members. That's also something interesting that happens. It's not that I'm sometimes maybe the last person to realize that there's something going on with a certain team member, and the other team members have just started to give that person the silent treatment. So I do this for the environment, for the system, in the end, for the company. So if I'm willing to accept that might help to enter this, but that this is uncomfortable, that this requires a lot of also courage, that this requires a certain self-reflection, like, how do I deal with my emotions? How do I bring across a message? Yeah, this is then again the skill set there. I said this can be learned. So I don't think that a conflict manager don't fall off the sky. Yeah, this is a skill to learn, like a salesperson learns also to sell. There is probably also a portion of talent coming with that, but the rest is also skill set. And that's true for many other functions, and that's true for such a communication skill. Yeah. So I understand the inner hurdle. It
requires a self-pep talk.
This is not doing it, not addressing the conflict, maybe also a short-term benefit, like seems quiet. That's maybe also the thinking. One of the motivations to not go in like, oh, I like it quiet. I like it when people smile. But this may backfire then at a later point. And if we stay in the picture of the fire, I have maybe a smoldering fire, and at some point I feel heat. When I see smoke, it gets critical. When I have open flames, then I have to bring people into safety. And that's then usually when it starts getting too late. And then I need to call the fire department. And the other thing is, as a firefighter, we are often perceived as heroes. And maybe that's also something. When escalated situations happen, and then I go in and maybe I resolve it with whatever strategy, maybe I'm just the loudest and strongest person in the room, then I may have the feeling of, oh, wow, I was the hero of the situation. And in all this, let's say, quiet, calm conflict handling mode, maybe even in prevention mode, there's no glory in that. Nobody sees that, how I'm preventing that. And that's maybe subconsciously also a driver to say, hey, let's be the hero who saves the cat from the burning house.
That's a very interesting idea. I've never thought about that, but that's also true. Exactly. Yeah. So this is the answer. This would be the answer to my last question. How do you shift from being a firefighter to resolving conflicts from the very beginning?
Yeah,
it's this would be the question. Just address the conflict from the very beginning, prepare, and do the prep work.
Yeah,
even if it takes courage. time,
effort, but it's also something to build up, like with a training plan. Instead of only thinking about the competition, I have to rather think about how do we train us as a team, as an environment, in facing up to the challenge. So one of the things is, I try, doesn't mean that I always succeed, to give conflict a regular space, both in individual meetings as on team level. In individual meetings, I can somehow ask my direct reports about what's going wrong, what's hindering you, what can I do? The question, what do you expect from me in certain situations, also help me clarify my role. And that may not be the point where somebody says, yeah, I have a problem with you, boss, and now I need to bring this up. But I see early signs. Where are frictions in the team with interfaces, with stakeholders, with clients and so on. And I can then create further conversation to look deeper into that. But ideally, I clarify also the expectation from my team members towards me. And on team level, this can be something simple as a regular check-in. That's how it starts. So baby steps, again, as a strategy. And the check-in, not like, what did you do on the weekend and things like that. Rather like, what's your energy level, or what challenge do you face this week? What's your biggest problem right now? What are our pain points? And then listen carefully. And then listen and hear. And then there's still often enough the decision to take to say, that's something we'll solve by itself, and people will work on it, and the system kind of can also regulate itself at a certain level. But they may be also signs where I say, maybe I need to ask further. And then comes again this curiosity, ask what's going on, what's behind that. On a more structured level in the team, retrospectives can help. What we very often do, we look into the future. What do we need to do now, this week, next quarter, and so on. We don't look back what went well last quarter or last project, and what did not go well, and what did not go well on the level where we again come to topics like, he or she did not submit something on time. We had a difficulty with the other department. They kind of didn't want to take their responsibility. All these things then are looked at in hindsight, but they can be used to prevent it maybe in the next project, in the next quarter, in the next sprint, whatever the environment takes there.
We're talking about regular check-ins. That's what happens in practice, that managers only do the check-in once a year when they have the performance evaluation.
Yeah,
so but regular check-ins.
And what I mean as a check-in is actually to also start a team meeting where everybody has a short voice and maybe answers to the question like, I don't know, what's your biggest challenge this week? And just name something. That's the kind of check-in that I mean check into the meeting. These meetings that you now refer to, the feedback meetings, here I would like to propose something that is also counterintuitive. I'm, of course, somehow programmed to give feedback. As a manager. That's part of the process. That's part of the standard expectations. The key here to somehow find early signs for conflicts is to ask for feedback. So I, as a manager, need to find ways to also ask for a manager. That doesn't mean that I have to open the door, run into the office and say, how do you like me? It's rather having this also as a process and saying, how do you see my role? Do you find that I'm managing too much on the micro level? Do you need more leash? And all these kinds of questions can also indicate where do we have friction in the collaboration. And wherever I decompress a little bit of tension, wherever I do this, it's like opening the valve just a little bit, and a bit of pressure comes out, the less I run the risk that my system overpressures and explodes at another point. I need to find these points where I decompress a little bit. And that's the prevention approach, but nobody sees that. Nobody will come and say, oh, wow, you're doing great things to avoid conflict. A great job. And it's also hard to prove because the entire team doesn't run a blind study, but a manager should usually see the progress that the team makes in making conflict a normal, regular topic, nothing to be afraid of. It's also about, do I have the safe space to actually address conflict? And that's something that a manager can facilitate, the kind of culture, the kind of communication style to make it possible to address conflictuous topics.
It makes so much sense. Daniel, thank you so much. Can you imagine that almost 1 hour passed or has passed already?
And it's still just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. We can go on and on discussing about this topic, but the hour passed. So I want to thank you very much for your valuable input. I think it will be very useful for the persons who are watching us. Thank you so much once again. And I hope we'll get the chance to do another episode on another interesting topic in the near future.
I would love to. Thank you too.
And thank you to you all for watching us. If you like this episode or like our podcast altogether, please feel free to like, subscribe, and just forward our episodes. Thank you so much. Bye.